Today, I want to talk about a principle that, while seemingly rooted in strategy or even mystery, actually has deep psychological and neurobiological underpinnings. Don't let people know too much about you. Now, this is not a call for isolation. It's not a suggestion to live a life of secrecy. What I'm referring to is the selective management of what you reveal, when, and to whom. This principle is less about hiding and more about protecting the integrity of your nervous system and the clarity of your goals. Oversharing weakens psychological boundaries. This statement, while simple on the surface, reflects a complex interplay between cognitive function, emotional regulation, and social dynamics. From a neuroscience perspective, the act of sharing personal information activates several areas of the brain, particularly those involved in self-referential thinking, such as the medial prefrontal cortex. When we share something personal, we momentarily shift from an internally regulated state to one that depends on external validation. If this becomes a habitual pattern, it begins to erode the boundary between self and other. Our psychological boundaries are, in many ways, like the immune system of the mind. They define what we allow in and what we keep out. They regulate the flow of information between our internal world and the environment. When we share selectively, we're essentially filtering what enters our social space. But when we overshare, when we disclose too much too quickly or to the wrong people, we compromise that filter. We become more vulnerable not only to judgment and manipulation, but also to internal confusion. The mind starts integrating external responses into its self-assessment loop, often leading to second-guessing, overthinking, and emotional instability. There's also a neurochemical component to this. Sharing personal experiences, especially emotionally charged ones, can trigger a dopamine release, which feels rewarding in the moment. This makes oversharing addictive for some people. It creates a temporary sense of connection, but that connection is often superficial or unsustainable. Over time, the brain associates disclosure with relief or gratification, not discernment or trust. This reinforces a cycle where we feel compelled to expose more and more of ourselves without evaluating the long-term effects on our autonomy. From a psychological standpoint, consistent oversharing can be a sign of blurred identity boundaries. It's common in individuals who are seeking approval, affirmation, or belonging. However, the paradox is that oversharing can often lead to the opposite outcome. It may overwhelm others, create discomfort, or be used against the individual in social hierarchies. This contributes to a heightened sense of vulnerability and can even lead to social withdrawal or self-censorship in the long run. The very act that was meant to foster connection can end up isolating the individual. In social and professional environments, this becomes even more consequential. When we reveal too much about our internal world, our fears, routines, weaknesses, we provide others with a map of how to influence, distract, or undermine us. Most people don't do this maliciously, but the human brain is wired to respond to information, and when given too much, it begins to form narratives, assumptions, and biases, whether consciously or not. These narratives then loop back to affect how we are treated, how we're perceived, and ultimately how we see ourselves. Selective disclosure preserves mental energy. The human brain operates on a limited supply of cognitive resources, and every decision we make throughout the day, no matter how minor, draws from that reservoir. When we practice selective disclosure, we are engaging in a form of cognitive efficiency. By choosing carefully what we share and with whom, we reduce the mental load required to manage our image, track multiple narratives, and maintain internal coherence across varied social settings. This, in turn, conserves energy that can be better directed toward problem solving, focus, creativity, and emotional regulation. The act of sharing personal information requires more than just verbal communication. It involves complex neural computations. Before speaking, the brain evaluates context, relevance, emotional risk, and the potential consequences of disclosure. This processing recruits multiple brain systems, including the prefrontal cortex for decision making and the limbic system for emotional assessment. When we overshare or speak impulsively, we increase the number of variables the brain must monitor after the fact. We begin to track how we were perceived, replay conversations, anticipate others' reactions, and modify future behavior based on projected outcomes. All of this creates cognitive drag. Mental energy is particularly sensitive to ambiguity and unpredictability. When we disclose too much, especially in uncertain social situations, we introduce more ambiguity into our environment. We are left wondering how the information is being interpreted, whether it will be passed on, or if it might be used in ways we did not anticipate. This leads to rumination, a process shown in numerous psychological studies to deplete working memory and increase anxiety. Selective disclosure, by contrast, limits the number of open loops the mind needs to manage. It allows for greater predictability in our social interactions and helps us stay anchored in the present. From a psychological perspective, practicing selective disclosure is also a form of boundary setting. Boundaries are not just behavioral, they are cognitive structures that delineate where our responsibilities end and others begin. When we maintain clear boundaries through selective sharing, we are communicating to our nervous system that we are in control. That sense of agency has a calming effect on the brain, particularly through the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs rest and recovery. By contrast, feeling exposed or overextended socially can activate stress circuits that elevate cortisol and lead to chronic fatigue. Moreover, selective disclosure supports emotional stability. Emotions are contagious, and the more we disclose, the more we risk absorbing others' emotional reactions to our lives. Whether it's sympathy, judgment, or unsolicited advice, every external input becomes a variable that our brain must regulate. When we are intentional about what we reveal, we are also managing the emotional input we must process. This level of control is not about manipulation, it's about sustainability. It's about maintaining the internal bandwidth necessary to navigate a complex world without becoming mentally or emotionally depleted. Self-monitoring increases when others know too much. This phenomenon is rooted in how the human brain responds to social exposure. When we are aware that people around us possess intimate or detailed knowledge about our lives, behaviors, or thought patterns, our internal sense of observation becomes heightened. This is largely driven by activity in the medial prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, areas associated with self-awareness and error detection. The brain starts to simulate the perspective of others, essentially asking, how do they see me? This constant simulation pulls attention away from present tasks and redirects it toward managing perception. At a neurobiological level, self-monitoring involves an interplay between cognitive control and emotional regulation systems. When others know more about us, we unconsciously adjust our behavior to match the version of ourselves we think they expect. This kind of mental adjustment burns cognitive energy. It activates the prefrontal cortex repeatedly to track, compare, and correct our actions in real time, often reducing spontaneity and increasing social fatigue. The more we think others are watching or judging us based on what they know, the more we internalize a sense of performance, even in casual or familiar environments. This heightened state of self-monitoring can be adaptive in short bursts, for example, during a job interview or high-stakes conversation. But when it becomes chronic, it begins to degrade our cognitive flexibility. We start to suppress natural impulses, second-guess our decisions, and edit our communication in real time, which increases mental load. Over time, this can contribute to symptoms of anxiety and reduced working memory capacity, as the brain is perpetually preoccupied with how we are being perceived rather than what we actually want to express or accomplish. Social psychology research has long demonstrated that perceived observation alters behavior. Even the suggestion of being watched, such as the presence of a mirror or camera, can lead individuals to behave more cautiously or conform to norms. When others know personal information about us, the effect is similar but more enduring. We become the mirror to ourselves. We start rehearsing conversations internally, filtering our emotional expressions, and trying to remain consistent with what we've previously shared. This leads to a narrowing of emotional expression and can disconnect us from our authentic internal states. In personal relationships, this can create a subtle sense of pressure. If someone knows sensitive information about your past or your vulnerabilities, you may feel a need to constantly manage how they interpret that knowledge. This adds another layer of cognitive work, as you are no longer just navigating the relationship, but also curating a consistent version of yourself that aligns with what they already know. This need for internal congruence can override your real-time feelings and distort natural behavior. Instead of responding openly or adaptively to the present moment, you respond based on how you fear you'll be interpreted. This compromises authenticity and adds unnecessary friction to social interactions. Excess exposure invites unnecessary judgment. This is a function of how social cognition works in the human brain. When people are presented with information, especially personal or emotionally charged content, their brains are wired to evaluate it, categorize it, and compare it against their existing beliefs and values. This evaluative process is rapid and largely unconscious, involving areas like the amygdala and the temporoparietal junction, which are responsible for emotional processing and social interpretation. The more personal information others have access to, the more material they possess to form opinions, whether accurate or not. Judgment, in this context, does not always appear as direct criticism. It can manifest subtly through altered tone, changed body language, or even silent assumptions. And these micro signals, though often undetectable on the surface, are registered by the brain's threat detection systems. The result is a low-level sense of vigilance or discomfort in social settings, even among people we consider close. This social tension places additional strain on the nervous system, keeping us in a state of heightened alertness and preventing us from fully relaxing or thinking clearly. The human brain seeks to resolve ambiguity. When we give people fragments of our personal stories, especially without sufficient context, they tend to fill in the gaps themselves. They construct narratives, infer motivations, and make predictions about our behavior. This is an automatic process the brain uses to maintain a sense of order and predictability in social environments. But these narratives are rarely objective. They're filtered through biases, past experiences, and cultural frameworks. This means that even well-meaning people may misinterpret or judge us unfairly simply because they are working with incomplete or misunderstood information. In a professional context, excess exposure can undermine credibility. When colleagues or superiors are given too much insight into personal struggles, emotional states, or lifestyle choices, it can alter how they assess competence or reliability. This may not be intentional or malicious, but it affects how opportunities are offered and how decisions are made. A casual disclosure made in a moment of openness can stick in someone's mind and color their perception of future performance. Once that perception is formed, it's difficult to reverse because people tend to filter new information in ways that confirm their existing beliefs. In friendships or romantic relationships, excessive disclosure can shift dynamics in unhelpful ways. If one person consistently shares their fears, past traumas, or insecurities, it can place the other in a position of psychological authority or emotional caretaking. This imbalance can erode mutual respect and generate a form of quiet judgment rooted in emotional fatigue. What begins as vulnerability can morph into perceived emotional dependence, leading to frustration or withdrawal. And once that emotional tone sets in, it's difficult to return to a more balanced and reciprocal connection. Even in digital spaces where people often feel freer to express themselves, the consequences of overexposure are similar. Social media posts, personal updates, or emotionally raw content can trigger judgment not only from close contacts, but from a wider, less empathetic audience. The broader the exposure, the greater the variability in how you are interpreted, and the less control you have over your own narrative. Control over your narrative enhances resilience. The concept of narrative is not just about storytelling. It's the way we frame our life experiences and internal states. It shapes how we perceive ourselves and how we interact with the world around us. Our narrative, especially in how we present it to others, influences our psychological resilience, the ability to adapt, recover, and stay grounded in the face of stress or adversity. When we control our narrative, we don't just filter what others see, we actively manage how we interpret and respond to external events, which in turn affects our emotional and cognitive stability. When we allow others too much access to our internal world or personal experiences, we lose control over how those experiences are perceived. External feedback and interpretations begin to shape our self-image, and this can be destabilizing. Each time someone else interprets our actions, motivations, or emotions, it creates a new variable we must process. This constant adjustment can fragment our sense of self and weaken our ability to stay grounded in our own internal values. By carefully managing what we reveal, we protect our sense of autonomy and self-concept, which enhances our resilience to external pressures. The brain is wired to prioritize coherence and predictability. When we control our narrative, we maintain coherence in how we think about ourselves. This coherence is essential for psychological health because it allows us to navigate life with a stable sense of identity. It's easier to adapt to change, take risks, or face challenges when we feel that our personal narrative is internally consistent and aligned with our core values. On the other hand, when we share too much and allow others to redefine our story, we invite external chaos into our personal world. This leads to cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that arises when our beliefs or behaviors conflict with how others perceive us. Cognitive dissonance increases mental strain and diminishes emotional resilience, as the mind must work harder to reconcile these discrepancies. One key aspect of resilience is emotional regulation, and controlling your narrative helps in this process. When we're in control of what we disclose, we are less likely to be overwhelmed by others' emotional responses. In social interactions, people often react emotionally to what they learn about us. These reactions can range from empathy and support to judgment or criticism. If we allow others unrestricted access to our internal states, we risk absorbing their emotional responses, which can drain our energy and affect our emotional equilibrium. However, by controlling the flow of personal information, We reduce the emotional weight of these interactions and allow ourselves to maintain a clearer and more focused mindset. Moreover, the act of controlling your narrative is a form of cognitive empowerment. It allows you to focus on what is most important to you without getting lost in external expectations or interpretations. When you reveal only what serves your emotional, psychological, and social needs, you retain a sense of direction. You are less likely to be swayed by others' opinions as you've established your own framework for understanding and approaching the world. This independence fosters resilience because it provides a buffer against the unpredictable nature of human interactions and the often overwhelming demands of social life. Ultimately, controlling your narrative is a form of self-preservation. It allows you to maintain clarity in your goals and emotional state while minimizing distractions from the external world. By protecting your inner story, you protect your ability to adapt, grow, and face life's challenges with a strong and unwavering sense of self. Protecting your inner world is strategic, not secretive. In a world that often demands transparency and openness, it's easy to mistake privacy for secrecy or isolation. However, there's a crucial distinction between keeping aspects of yourself private and withholding information out of a strategic need for self-preservation. The human brain thrives on stability, predictability, and coherence, and maintaining a strong, well-defined inner world is essential for cognitive and emotional well-being. By selectively protecting what you share with others, you create a buffer against external forces that might disrupt your psychological balance. This isn't about hiding or avoiding relationships. It's about setting boundaries that ensure your emotional and mental resilience remain intact. When we constantly expose ourselves, whether through social media, conversations, or other forms of sharing, we open ourselves up to the judgments, assumptions, and expectations of others. Every interaction, every piece of information shared invites external influence into our mental space. This influence can be positive, supportive, and validating, but it can also be draining, destabilizing, or manipulative. The more we allow others access to our internal world, the more we risk losing touch with our true selves. The brain has a limited capacity to process and incorporate new information. The constant influx of external feedback can cause confusion, self-doubt, and emotional fatigue as we struggle to reconcile our internal world with the messages we receive from others. Strategically protecting your inner world is a way of preserving your sense of autonomy. Autonomy is the ability to make choices based on your values and desires rather than being influenced by external pressures or expectations. The brain's prefrontal cortex plays a key role in decision making and self-regulation. And when we're constantly managing external input, it can become difficult to stay focused on our core priorities. By selectively revealing information, we shield ourselves from the cognitive overload that comes with overexposure. This allows us to maintain clarity and stay aligned with our personal goals without being distracted by the opinions and judgments of others. Moreover, protecting your inner world is crucial for emotional regulation. Emotions are contagious, and when we expose ourselves too freely, we risk absorbing the emotional states of others. This can lead to emotional exhaustion, anxiety, and a diminished sense of self. Our emotional boundaries are designed to protect us from being overwhelmed by others' feelings. By controlling the flow of personal information, we reduce the emotional burden of social interactions and ensure that we're not excessively influenced by others' emotional reactions. This allows us to maintain a calm and centered state, which is essential for managing stress, making clear decisions, and navigating difficult situations. In addition, protecting your inner world fosters a sense of self-respect. The more we share about ourselves, the more we give others the power to define or judge us. When we hold certain aspects of ourselves back, we maintain control over our identity. This is not about creating an impenetrable wall between ourselves and others, but about cultivating a healthy level of discernment in our interactions. It's about choosing when and to whom we reveal personal information based on trust